Hello, friends. Steve Stockton here with you. Welcome to Listener Stories, a chilling series where we delve into the depths of the unknown through spine tingling tales submitted by you, our listeners. From eerie encounters with the supernatural to inexplicable phenomena that defy all logic. Join us as we navigate the shadows of the human experience and explore the darkest corners of the imagination. Each episode promises to leave you on the edge of your seat, questioning what lurks in the darkness and what secrets lie hidden in the night. So dim the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself for a journey into the realm of the unexplained. A story from the early 1900s in Wales, UK. My grandmother would often warn my brother and I of the dangers of the woods and the mountains. My gran was a typical British lady. She had never told a lie in her life, and would often relay this to us if we were planning to go for a hike. As a young lad, I'd often dismissed the story as sort of folklore until I read the missing 411 books and discovered channels like yours. The story was always the same, even in her later years of life. As children, she would warn my brother and I of the dangers of getting lost in the mountains and forests and how we must always stay close to each other. She lived in Sarno in Gwynedd, North/Mid Wales for her whole life. When she was younger, she would play in the mountains and woods that surrounded the area. One day, she and her brothers were wandering through the forest collecting blackberries. I know, berries. They had ventured into a part of the forest they had been to 100 times. Berry patches they knew and had always visited, not far from their home. Somehow, she became separated from her brothers. She didn't ever go into detail about how they got separated, just that one minute they were there and the next they were gone. She wasn't scared, as she knew the area and decided to just walk home assuming her brothers would be there. As she's walking, though, the forest around her no longer seems familiar. She's no longer on a path she recognizes, and, being a little girl, she begins to get scared. She said she walked for hours and hours until it was completely dark. Now, this was in the early 1900s, so no phones or torches to aid her through the forest. She walked through the night, but eventually fell asleep, scared, cold, and alone. When she woke up, she could hear her father shouting for her, and the path that she hadn't recognized before is the path that leads to the fields at the back of her house, a path she would have recognized, and a path she was adamant was not there before. Her father and brothers had searched the woods for the whole night and into the morning when they finally found her. They found her not only a kilometer away from home and not more from 100 yards from the edge of the woodland, a part of the woods her brothers and father had searched before. She believed that something had tricked her mind or physically altered the forest around her. She was always adamant that she hadn't wandered off and that the paths and forests that she was walking in that night were not the same as it always had been. She never went in the woods for the rest of her life. Even as an adult, she wouldn't go near them. Unfortunately, she passed away in 2010 at 99 years old. The story happened when she was around 9 or 10. She was reported missing, and people from the village helped search for her. I don't know if there would be a record of this. I have no other information for now, but when I speak to my grandmother, her daughter, next, I will ask her to relay the full story again, as I'm sure I've missed bits, and it's been at least 15 years since I've heard it. Update: I spoke to my gran last night, and she went over a few more details that I'd forgotten. When my great-grandmother went missing, she said that the entire forest went quiet. No birds, no wind, no nothing. The whole time she was walking, she felt as if something were following her, like she was being watched, but any time she turned around, there was nothing there. It became even more intense once it got dark. The woodland she was walking through was only about 20 acres, but surrounded by mountains one side and a lake called Kirrini on the other, which was surrounded by large boulders, and above that a long stretch of marshland. Her father and brothers searched the entire woodlands along with locals, and then in the evening the police from the closest town, Bala, came, and eventually there was around 40 people. They walked through the woods in a line from one end to the other and didn't see her. The only thing they found was her basket she used to carry berries. She was adamant that she never left the forest, but her father and everyone else didn't believe her. She was found at around 2 p.m. the following day, laid down less than 500 meters from her house, right on the edge of the woodland. She said in the night she could hear people calling her name, but when she screamed, it was as if they couldn't hear her. She could see lights, but anytime she moved toward them, they moved further and further away. Eventually, she stayed in one place in the hope she would be found. When her father found her, they took her back to the farmhouse they lived in, and she slept for over 24 hours. She was 11 or 12 at the time, born in 1914, so this would have been around 1925 or 26. My grand's going to try and dig out the newspaper article about it. Thanks, Danny. My odd story. What happened to me was long before knowing that there was any problems with people going missing in our national park system. This happened the summer of 2001. My family and I were camping in our local canoe livery/campground. My kids were both real young at the time, and we had planned on spending the weekend there. Friday night came and went, and we had a lot of fun. So Saturday, we awoke and made a good camp breakfast, then went fishing. As the evening came, we had a nice fire, making s'mores and laughing, etc. When out of the blue sky, I started to feel sick, and I mean sicker than I had ever felt. Chills, headache, body ache, the whole 9 yards. We all then decided to turn in early with plans on waking up early and packing up and going home. As I lay there chilling with a high fever, it started raining like crazy. About 5 minutes into the monsoon, we started hearing branches breaking, first far away, but minute by minute they came closer to our campsite. My wife woke me up and she was scared. She could hear her kids crying in their tent. I, as sick as I was, jumped up and grabbed my 15-inch hunting knife and unzipped the tent, and I ran toward the noise, knife in one hand, flashlight in the other. I approached the area that I figured it was coming from. To my relief, there was nothing there. I know I couldn't have been back in my sleeping bag, now wet and my fever was off the chart, and we heard motorcycles not 25 feet away. We didn't wait. 2:45 a.m., we packed up the Bronco, left the tents, and rushed home. I never thought much about it, nothing more than a ruined weekend due to my not feeling good. But around 2 years ago, I heard about David Paulides and how some people have experiences like this prior to them going missing. I now wonder if I was up next. Signed, Anonymous. A Cry in the Night, an experience in Palmdale. I've had more than one paranormal experience in my life, and a couple of them have been downright frightening. But the story I'll tell today will not be as frightening as it is intriguing, and it goes back to a time when I was approximately 14 years old. At that time, my parents had become discontent with where we lived in Texas and decided that we would move from there to sunny California in hopes of starting a new life. The decision that my parents made wasn't altogether as irrational as it may sound, because my parents did have friends living in Palmdale. And so, having been invited by them to come live on their property till my dad could get work and we could get a new life established, we took the camper and loaded our vehicle with all things near and dear to our heart and headed for Palmdale. Keeping their name anonymous, our friends, the Smiths, lived approximately 5 to 8 miles outside of Palmdale. Being only 14 years old at the time, I don't recall the exact mileage, but where they lived was what we referred to as out in the boonies, and it was definitely a sight that I had never seen before. Out on a vast expanse of the Mojave Desert, surrounded by Joshua trees, cacti, and thick dunes of sand, stood the Smiths' home. It was truly an amazing sight for a young teen to behold. It was wide open desert as far as the eye could see. The only other structure in this dry and barren land was an old abandoned 2-story building perched high on the corner where we made our last turn, which led to the Smiths' house. This building stood about 150 yards from where the Smiths lived. And unbeknownst to me, this abandoned building would play a key role in one of the strangest nights of my life. The Smiths had 2 sons and a daughter. The boys were about my age, and they also had a big, fun dog who loved to dig in the sand. With a fence all the way around their property and a wide gate to pull a camper into. My dad pulled the camper inside the fence and got it set up. And at that, we began our new life in Palmdale, California. As the days went by, I got to know my newfound friends, and we had great fun together. One day, we even went down to the old abandoned two-story building and rode skateboards around it. And well, here's a good place to start telling the main part of my story, and it begins one night after we had all gone to bed. Everyone at the Smith's house had turned in and gone to bed, and my family and I had gone into our camper and bedded down for the night ourselves. On this night, I was awakened with the sound of a baby crying. I didn't look at the time, but it had to have been in the wee hours of the morning because everyone in the camper was sound asleep. When I awoke, I was very intrigued with the sound of this baby crying, and for some reason, I was very compelled to get up and go look for the baby. I still remember how drawn away I was that night in my desire to find this crying baby. I never woke my parents up to tell them there was a baby crying, nor did I wake up either of my two siblings. I just got up out of my bed and walked out of the camper into the desert night. I kept on hearing the baby crying, and I felt a desperate need to find it. I remember clearly that it was as if I was under a spell or in a trance. I wasn't afraid, I just wanted to find that baby. I began to realize that the cries of this baby were coming from down the road, and like a moth drawn to a flame, I was drawn down the road toward the origin of these cries. I walked through the Smith's yard by the light of a light pole. When I got to the gate of the fence, I opened the gate and stepped through it and began walking down the road toward the abandoned building. The baby was crying and crying, and it sounded so innocent, and I was so compelled to find this little baby. So I continued on my walk toward the abandoned building in search for the crying baby. This abandoned building, as I mentioned earlier, was about 150 yards from the Smith's house, and there were no street lamps on the street. As I searched for the baby, I sincerely wondered to myself, why is this baby crying? And where is this baby at? Then suddenly, all at once, about halfway down the road, it was as if I came to my senses and I thought, what am I doing walking down the road at night? I knew that I'd been hearing a baby cry, and I knew that I was searching for the baby. But when I realized where I actually was, I turned around and quickly got back to the Smith's yard and went back into the camper, laid down, and went to sleep. The next morning, around the breakfast table at the Smith's home, I told them about the experience that I'd had the previous night, but I had never expected to hear the profound statement that came from Mr. Smith after he had heard my story. He said that the old abandoned building down the road was, at one time, an clinic. This was all the information I received from Mr. Smith, but I was very grateful that he told me what he did about that building. If I may say for the record, I've never sleepwalked in my life, and I know that this was not a case of sleepwalking because I was aware of everything that I did from the moment I woke up that night until I got back to the camper and laid back down. It still astonishes me today when I think back on that night and what Mr. Smith told me the following morning. But it adds one more piece to the puzzle in the search to solve the mysteries of the supernatural and paranormal realm. I still don't completely understand what the reasoning of this experience was, but it could definitely have more than one meaning. Was it some malevolent entity luring me down the road by exploiting my natural instinct to bring aid to a baby in distress? Or was it truly the spirit of an infant that I heard, who had been a very building? Many years have come and gone since that night, and I've learned much about the spirit realm, paranormal activity, and/or things that go bump in the night. I enjoy very much learning new things in the area of the paranormal, but I go nowhere without spiritual protection. My spiritual protection is Jesus. Thank you so much for presenting my story. Sincerely, Clifton. My demonic haunting. Hi, Steve. My name is Bry, which is not my real name, of course, but you understand why I'm not giving it in full, I'm sure. I'm 35 and I'm from and grew up in the Appalachian Mountains with my grandparents. I've loved hunting and being in the woods, and after this happened, I couldn't get enough of the paranormal. I just had to know what I was dealing with and how to stop it, and then I wanted to help others that had their childhood ruined by these types of spirits. In doing research, I discovered right around the time of my very first encounter, my grandpa had been saved at the local church. Something very bad happened to him one night where a demon came to him and said for the life of sin he had caused, he would burn in hell forever, and it was too late. My grandpa went to church that Sunday and never stopped till his health was so bad he couldn't make it. The demons told me in the middle of my haunting it was this reason they came for me. They were so upset that my grandpa had changed and took the path of Jesus, our Lord and Savior. Please understand this is very hard for me to speak about because the amount of fear these entities put in me was so great I often would pass out, and this only made them stronger. I'm so afraid that talking about it will bring them back to me. I don't know if I could go through that again, but I believe the Lord would want me to educate others and be brave and strong, for I know that good always overcomes evil. So here goes. And please understand this may take a few emails. And if you want to share with the listeners, you can tell them I will make sure you get an email each week. And Steve, all this is 100% true. I believe that you've read enough emails so you can just tell. So here's the story of my demonic haunting. The first time I noticed anything was on a cold, cold night in 1988. I slept beside my grandparents because I had asthma, so my bed was by theirs in a small home in the North Carolina mountains. It was very chilly that night and windy as all get out. Nothing like the howling of the wind in the mountains. It was like a huge train the size of a mountain itself flying by the home, running 90 miles an hour. That night, I had a dream that scared the life out of me, but I don't know why it was only of me in a room staring at a TV screen, and all that was on it was fuzz, and it would get bigger and bigger and bigger. The fuzz would get so big it would terrify me beyond belief. I woke up so scared it took my grandpa hours to convince me it was only a dream. Weird, I know, and to this day, I still have no idea what it symbolized, unless it was the opening of a portal. These evil entities can use your dreams to open portals and come straight to our existence. That's all I could figure out, and the reason I know that the dream was important was the very next night I woke up 60 yards from my bed outside at my mailbox around 2 or 3 a.m. I ran back to the house, but the door was locked. I had to beat on the door screaming for my granny and grandpa to let me in. I was only 7 and it was around 12 degrees. I will never forget staring at the thermometer when the porch light was flipped on when they came to the door. I fell in my granny's arms and broke down, trying to explain I woke up this way and didn't sneak out. She and I wondered why I locked the door, and I honestly knew I didn't, but how I would not know until later. This entity communicated with me telepathically. 2 nights after this, all would be put into a horrifying realization. It was cold, and I'd finally fallen asleep, which was hard after waking up outside, and awoke in such instant panic and fear that I knew there was something very, very bad in that room, and it was close. I felt it as much as I could in my own body. Then down at the foot of my bed, near the nightlight, stood a very tall, dark, cloaked figure. It had on a cape with a hood and looked just as the Grim Reaper would, with only its outline visible and without the blade. It just stood there, and I was so scared I couldn't move. I knew it was real, that it was standing there, and it wasn't a dream or me seeing things. You could feel the heat coming from it. Not cold, as some say, but heat. And as scary as this was, the nights and weeks only got worse. After the last entity I saw, or the second one, not sure if I told you about this one, but it was shortly after the cloaked figure. This time, though, from the light coming in from the bay window, I saw a face, and it turned to glare at me. And I know it wanted me to see it very clearly, and when I tell you it was the most demonic-looking lady-like face you could ever imagine, God above knows I mean it. This figure was a cross between the girl from The Exorcist, but older, and with short hair that was disheveled. At the time I could not describe it, but as Hollywood has helped a little, it's now closest to what I saw. My body froze with a terror that you could never imagine in your deepest and darkest dreams, or any fear you could receive from anything on earth, but looking straight into this demon's red eyes. It kept walking right through the wall, I'm guessing outside of wherever a demon goes. After this encounter, things went quiet for a while, and I don't know or understand why, but it did. So much, in fact, I decided to move across the double wide to my own room. Now at age 10 or 11, I wanted my own bedroom and privacy. It was time to grow up and become a big boy. I was so excited. Now, from my new room, I could see the living room out of my door, and a straight shot from there I could see the kitchen over the bar and to my grandparents' room. I could see if their lights were on at least, so I felt comfortable. As their lights went out, I scrambled into bed. I just got a new bunk bed. It was a new style that came out in the Sears catalog. It had the full size on bottom and a twin on top and was made out of red-colored metal. It had a cool little ladder that went to the top. I loved it. I had my radio on 97.3, which played easy music of the 90s back then in the North Carolina mountains. Things like Bryan Adams and Angel by Aerosmith. Perfect music for an 11-year-old kid to fall asleep. I was just getting ready to doze off when, bam, this very loud pop sounded right above my bed. I later learned that this is a portal opening. But at this time, I come to realize that pops and glass breaking sounds means the monsters are coming. Then my closet, which were the metal sliding door, sounded as if something or someone just punched them very hard. I could feel all the fear coming back. I could feel the sweat popping out on my little face. I was so scared. But before, where I was next to Granny and Papa, but now so alone and no one to jump into bed with if I feel as if my life were in danger. Back when it first started, I would take the fear. It was taught in my family, we work hard, we love and respect one another, and fear was okay, but we overcome it and it's what makes us stronger. But when I felt my life was in danger, I would sometimes find myself leaping into bed with my grandparents. A single leap almost. A leap caused by intense, horrific, and traumatic fear. Fear of the devil dragging me to hell and my life being no more. My grandpa going to church taught me, as the Baptists did and do, of hell and the devil coming to get us if we sin. I knew I couldn't sin. I was a young kid. I did think maybe this was happening because I backtalked sometimes or told a few fibs. It was my way to condone this in any way that would make sense at all. The closet never opened, just hard bangs there in the walls, and I heard chewing and scrambling. To be continued. Signed, Bry. Well, there you have it. Let us know what you think about these stories in the comments below, but please be respectful of the opinions of others. And if you have any strange stories you would like to see featured in an upcoming video, email them to nationalparkmysteriesYT@gmail.com. We're very interested in stories that detail encounters with ghosts, humanoids, cryptids, or any type of other unknown entity that is beyond explanation. Thanks again for listening, and please be sure to give us a like on the video and to share and subscribe for more strange stories. Meanwhile, be good to yourselves and each other. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time.